There's a moment that happens in some childhoods, a moment when everything shifts. You're 8 years old, standing in the kitchen, and you realize your parent isn't coming home sober tonight. Or you're 10, mediating another screaming match between the adults who are supposed to protect you. Maybe you're 12, raising your younger siblings because nobody else will. And something ancient, something survival-based, clicks into place in your developing brain. A silent agreement you never signed. If I don't hold this together, everything falls apart. This is how a childhood disappears. Not in a single traumatic event, but in the quiet accumulation of responsibilities that should never belong to a child. And the world doesn't see it as tragedy. The world calls it maturity. You're so responsible. You're so grown up for your age. You're such a good kid. But nobody stops to ask the question that matters most. At what cost? Welcome to the psychology of the child who grew up too fast. And if you recognize yourself in these words, know that you're not alone. What happened to you has a name. It's called parentification. And today, we're exploring what it does to the developing brain, how it follows you into adulthood, and most importantly, how healing becomes possible. Parentification was first identified in the late 1960s by psychiatrist Ivan Bosormeny-Nagy, one of the founders of family therapy. The term describes what happens when the roles of parent and child reverse. When a child becomes the caregiver instead of being cared for. And this isn't about occasionally helping with chores or babysitting a sibling. This is about developmentally inappropriate responsibilities that fundamentally alter how a child's brain develops. Research has identified 2 distinct types of parentification. Instrumental parentification involves taking on physical tasks, cooking meals for the family, managing household finances, caring for younger siblings as if you're their parent, working to bring money into the home. Emotional parentification is more invisible but equally damaging. This is when a child becomes their parent's therapist, their confidant, their emotional support system. When you're the one calming mom down after she breaks up with another boyfriend. When dad vents to you about financial stress, and you're expected to reassure him. When you mediate conflicts between adults who should be mediating conflicts for you. Here's what makes this so psychologically devastating. When children are consistently forced to emotionally regulate for adults, their nervous system rewires itself. Studies on parentified children show they develop something called hypervigilance. Your brain becomes a threat detection system that never turns off. You're always scanning for danger, always reading the room, always walking on eggshells because you learned early that safety depends on your ability to predict and manage other people's emotions. Neuroscience research has revealed something fascinating and heartbreaking about children who experience early adversity. Their brains develop differently. Studies on previously institutionalized children show that exposure to stress and deprivation creates a pattern of brain connectivity that looks more adult than child. The areas responsible for threat detection, the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, activate in ways that typically aren't seen until adulthood. On the surface, this might seem adaptive. The brain is trying to protect you. But here's the problem. These children are bypassing crucial developmental stages. They're not learning to play, to explore, to trust. They're learning to survive. Research has consistently shown that stress hormones like cortisol explain part of this accelerated development. When you grow up in chaos, your body stays flooded with stress chemicals. This creates lasting changes in brain structure. Studies have found that children who experience chronic stress often develop a smaller prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function, emotional regulation, and decision-making. The very tools you need to thrive as an adult are compromised before you even reach adolescence, and the effects don't stop when childhood ends. Research on adult outcomes of parentification reveals a cascade of consequences. Studies show that parentified children are more likely to struggle with anxiety disorders, depression, and somatic symptoms like chronic headaches or digestive issues. They have higher rates of relationship difficulties, academic challenges, and what researchers call caretaker syndrome, where the pattern of overfunctioning for others continues into every relationship they enter. Attachment theory helps us understand why this happens. When children should be developing secure attachment with caregivers who meet their needs, parentified children learn the opposite. They learn that love is conditional, that their worth depends on how much they can give. Research consistently shows that emotional parentification especially leads to insecure attachment patterns. By adulthood, this translates into difficulty trusting others, discomfort expressing your own needs, and a tendency to either cling anxiously to relationships or withdraw emotionally. Studies have found that adults who were parentified often become the caretaker in every friendship and romantic relationship, unconsciously seeking out people who need them, repeating the only dynamic they know. Around 25% of children experience at least one traumatic event by age 16. Estimates of parentification prevalence range widely, from a few percent to over 30% depending on the population studied. What's particularly striking is that in 2019, 26% of youth in the United States lived with only one biological parent, and 4% lived with neither, creating situations where role reversal becomes more likely. Single parents working multiple jobs, parents struggling with mental illness or addiction, families dealing with chronic health conditions. These are the environments where parentification takes root. Here's what this looks like in adulthood. You become hyper-independent, incapable of asking for help because you learned help wasn't available. You struggle with boundaries because your boundaries were violated so consistently that you do not know where you end and others begin. You feel guilty for resting because productivity is the only way you've ever felt worthy. You experience what some researchers call a lost childhood, grief for experiences you never had, for the innocence you never got to keep. Studies show that parentified adults often describe feeling like they missed developmental milestones, had insufficient time for play, and lacked basic comfort when they needed it most. But here's where the story can shift. Healing from parentification is possible. Recent research on recovery emphasizes several key approaches. First, acknowledgement. You cannot heal what you don't recognize. Studies show that naming the experience, understanding that it wasn't normal and wasn't your fault, is the crucial first step. This is where validation replaces the self-gaslighting that tells you it wasn't that bad or everyone had it worse. Therapy, particularly trauma-informed approaches, has shown significant effectiveness. Research on treatments for parentification trauma highlights methods like cognitive behavioral therapy, internal family systems, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and dialectical behavior therapy. These approaches help you process the frozen emotions from childhood, develop healthy coping strategies, and learn to set boundaries for the first time in your life. Inner child work has emerged as a powerful healing modality. This involves connecting with the younger version of yourself who carried those adult burdens. Research on reparenting, where you learn to give yourself the care you never received, shows that it can fundamentally shift how you relate to yourself and others. Studies indicate that practices like visualization, journaling, and engaging in playful activities you missed as a child can help integrate those wounded parts of yourself. The research also points to the importance of self-compassion. Adults who were parentified often struggle with harsh self-criticism, having internalized the belief that their needs don't matter. Learning to speak to yourself with kindness, to recognize your inherent worth regardless of what you do for others, is transformative. Support groups and community connections also play a vital role, providing validation and reducing the isolation that so often accompanies this experience. What's crucial to understand is this: your maturity wasn't the problem. The problem was that you had no choice. But now you do. You can choose softness over strength, rest over relentless productivity, vulnerability over performance. You can choose to stop being everyone's therapist and start being your own advocate. Research shows that with proper support and intervention, the cycle can break. You don't have to repeat these patterns. You can give yourself permission to finally be the child who deserves care, even as an adult. If this resonates with you, if you see yourself in these patterns, know that your story doesn't end with what was done to you. Healing isn't about erasing your past. It's about refusing to let it define your future. It's about going back for that child you used to be and saying what nobody else ever said. You didn't deserve that. You were just a child, and you get to rest now. The research is clear. The psychology of growing up too fast leaves lasting marks, but it also shows us the path forward. Awareness, validation, support, therapy, community, self-compassion. These aren't just abstract concepts. They're evidence-based tools that can help you reclaim the life you deserve. You never had a childhood, but you still have a future, and this time, you get to write it. If you found this information valuable, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content on psychology and personal development. And remember, healing is always possible. You're not alone in this journey.